It wasn't hard for me to find a meeting. My accountant, 20 years, is a guy named John Barry, office right across the street. So it also, I think I'm one of the few people who didn't park in the right place, doesn't have to worry about being towed, hopefully. And I always enjoy coming to these meetings. This is how I got started in politics. I was usually the one young person at our local Democratic club meeting. I was a precinct captain for Jesse Jackson when I was 14 years old in 1988. I went on to be U142 caucus as well. So you know, I've known me as the former president of the NAACP. I've spent my life standing up to bullies like Donald Trump. Which you may not know of, and I'm proud to be the only gubernatorial candidate in America who's already been arrested outside of his White House. I was out there defending our dreamers, but 2 weeks before I was sent to jail outside Trump's White House, a Maryland dreamer had been found dead in a trailer in a Walmart parking lot in Texas, 20 other people, trying to get back to their family. And I had chaired the campaign to pass the DREAM Act here in Maryland, as co-chair in 2013, and 2012. And I promised those kids that I would always stand up with them. And then they called and said, this time we're too afraid, and we're asking our allies to get arrested for us. And so I was proud to go. I was named Maryland Leader of the Year by the Baltimore Sun in 2013 because of my role co-chairing that campaign. But it was the same year that I also, as head of the NAACP, put organizers on the ground to deliver the black vote for marriage equality in Baltimore City and in Prince George's County. And we were able to do that because we did deep listening with the black church community. We said, look, we want to stand up for everybody's 14th Amendment rights. We just want to make sure our First Amendment rights will be protected too. You might recall that the language on our ballot affirmed both. And that's how we got that consensus and we got it done. That year, I also, 2012, led the successful effort in our state to abolish the death penalty. Something that Martin had tried to do a few years earlier and failed. And I sat down with him and I laid out the plan for how we would win this time, and we ran that strategy and we won. First state south of the Mason-Dixon to ever abolish the death penalty. What you may not know about me is that my life has also been spent growing small businesses. I've been an executive or partner in a small business since I was 26 years old. Executive in a nonprofit or partner in a small business since I was 26 years old. When I was 26, I was running a trade association of 200 small businesses. That's when John Barry became my accountant. I'm now going into my 5th year as a partner at Cape Wood Capital. We're the only Silicon Valley-based seed stage investment firm that has a Baltimore office, and I run the Baltimore office. We invest in social impact companies that have a double bottom line. Companies like Pigeon Lee, co-founded by a Morgan State graduate. It's cut the cost of having a family member who's an inmate call home to you by more than 80%. And that's the type of thing that we invest in. It's that combination of sort of big vision, frankly, a commitment to resisting this president, but also moving beyond resistance and really moving our families forward no matter what happens in Washington, that fuels this campaign. And what does that look like? As somebody who has 2 kids in the public schools in our state, somebody whose mom desegregated Western High School for girls in 1955 after suing it when she was 12 in 1952. I'm deeply committed to making sure that our public schools are fully funded. As someone who's managed budgets their whole adult life, when I look at our budget, what I see is we don't have a money problem when it comes to funding education in Maryland. We have a priority problem. And so I've said very clearly that my first budget as governor, first thing we will get done, because our governor has more power when it comes to the budget than any governor in this country, is I will keep the broken promise that the casino money and the lottery money will actually be used to fully fund our schools, and we'll go further and actually get rid of the state's underfunding. We will end the era of the state underfunding our public schools, which has gone on for far too long. As an organizer, I know we have a lot of folks in our community who don't have health care. As a business person, I know that our surging healthcare costs are killing our small businesses. One of the most remarkable things that's happened to me in this campaign, even more remarkable than having a fellow activist literally collapse crying into my arms at a rally after I had disclosed that I had juvenile epilepsy and did not have health care, and was because of public health care that I'm alive today. His girlfriend had died of an epileptic seizure 5 days earlier. She didn't have health care. World-renowned psychologist, 52 years old. Dad's a doctor, but she didn't have health care because she had lost her job. Died. Montgomery County. Even more remarkable than that was I was in a backyard in Easton, and a guy who had voted for Obama twice and then switched and voted for Trump said, "I have one question for you, Mr. Jellis." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Do you support single payer? Do you support Medicare for all?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, then I'm going to vote for you, and I'll organize other people who switch from Obama to Trump to vote for you too." And I said, "Well, I got a question for you then." That's quite a headline. Trump voter backs former NAACP chief for governor. Why? And he said, "Because I'm the finance manager at a car dealership. And every year," and if you know small business people, how many small business people are in this room? All of us get anxious when the open enrollment period's coming, right? And he described that as the one day that he loads every year, because every year he finds out once again healthcare costs are going up further than he expected. And then he has to have two conversations he hates to have. One with the owner to say, "Boss, we must revise down everything again. Profit projections, bonus projections, everything." And the other, and he got choked up. He said, "With the employees whom I love." And I got to tell them once again, not only their bonuses are going to be smaller than they had hoped, but when it comes to health care, they will be paying more and their families will be getting less. I spent 6 months of my life in 2016 trying to move a factory built by an American entrepreneur in Edmonton, Canada, to South Baltimore onto a street, 3/4 of which, on a block on East Redbird Street, 3/4 of which is a housing project and 1/4 of which was a brownfield. And this was a factory we could put right on top of that brownfield, and it would have, on day one, had 3 dozen good-paying, $15 per hour, low-skilled jobs with health care. Would have revolutionized life for families in those housing projects. Day 1,000, we projected we have about 300 such jobs. And the deal fell apart, not because here in America you have to pay for your health care on top of your taxes, because in Canada your taxes cover it. He was going to save so much in transportation costs that was fine. No, it fell apart because he was going to have to insure his employees from the exchange. And the prices in the exchange had surged 55% in just a few years. And he asked me a simple question: are they likely to go up again? And I had to give him an honest answer, which was yes. And then they surged 30%. And so I'm proud to be the only candidate out here who's actually put out a plan for moving us to Medicare for all. Yes. Now I get that we will likely have to get rid of the president to get the final waivers that we need. You can sign me up for that too. And in fact, that conversation on the Eastern Shore with Billy Andrews, that a guy who voted for Trump, who's now out there organizing for me, confirms that the two things are related. They're actually building a movement to make sure that we catch up with the rest of the Western world and provide health care for everybody in this country is part of building the movement to get rid of Donald Trump. Funny thing happens. When you campaign on kitchen table issues, you can pull folks together who typically see themselves as being apart from each other. And that's the only way that I know how to win. That's how we won those battles in 2012. We didn't individually seek to abolish the death penalty and pass marriage equality and pass the DREAM Act. We actually put up signs, some of you may still have them in your garages, that said all on one sign, abolish the death penalty, pass marriage equality, pass the DREAM Act. In other words, we just adopted the motto of the Three Musketeers and said all for one and one for all. And so I go back to the Eastern Shore to meet with Billy, and I'm 45 minutes late going into an attorney's office.
Who's leaning against the
Don't feel bad. When I was doing advance for Bill Clinton in Arkansas 20 years ago, I did the same thing, and the Secret Service literally threatened to shoot me.
You'll learn.
Never did that again. So I go back to meet with Billy, and I kept him waiting. I come, and I'm very apologetic. Billy, I'm so sorry. He said, Ben, don't apologize. So I've just had the most wonderful conversation with these young people. He points at a bunch of dreamers who were waiting to meet with the wife of the attorney whose office we were using. He said, they're wonderful, and you can sign me up for defending the DREAM Act too. And I was like, Billy, like you're evolving right in front of me. Like what's going on, man? And he says, well, they're wonderful, and they work hard, and we all descend from immigrants. And I want to sell them a car, and they can't buy cars until they get status. So let's get that done. The other conversation I carry with me happened right here in Catonsville on the 4th of July. And I decided to be a little bit more efficient on the 4th of July. My son's birthday is the 4th of July, so I had to do all the parades and then get back and celebrate a birthday and charge the birthday. So I didn't march any parades. I just ran down and shook everybody's hand, and I was doing that in Catonsville, and this guy engaged me. He kept asking me questions, and he kept nodding, and he felt like he was really into my kind of ideas for moving the state forward. And then he says, I should have told you at the beginning, I'm a Republican. I've only ever voted for Republicans. This 21228 lacrosse shirt on. And I said, wow, so that's like 15 minutes of my life I don't get back, right? And he laughed, and he said, no. He said, no, I was nodding for a reason. He said, all these issues you're talking about, ending the era of massive student debt and paying for it by ending mass incarceration, health care for all, putting the government back on the side of small businesses again. He said, the fact that you actually know regulations you don't like, I've never met a Democrat like that before. Top of my list is the one that says in Annapolis, the businesses on one side of West Street can't sell bagels because they're on the residential side, even though there's like 12 businesses on that side of the street. I like bagels, and I like that coffee shop, but they have to sell me donuts. And he says, the whole time you were talking, I just kept thinking about my favorite line from my favorite poet. And I said, brother, what's your favorite line from your favorite poet? He said, we have more in common than we have uncommon. I said, that sounds familiar. Who's your favorite poet? He said, Dr. Maya Angelou. Well, at the moment, you got white Republicans in Catonsville quoting Maya Angelou, the former president of the NAACP. Larry Hogan might just have a reason to be afraid. Thank you. It's a real pleasure. Yeah, please. Happy to take as many questions. Yes, sir.
I think it's beginning to dawn on a lot of people that the war on drugs has been a total, complete failure.
Exclamation point underline, yes.
And I'm just wondering on a state level,
yeah,
because there's obviously things need to happen on a federal level, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. But on a state level, what do you propose to handle?
I believe we should legalize and tax adult use of cannabis, of marijuana. I believe it for several reasons. MS-13 is in my daughter's junior high school. I don't like anything that puts money in the pocket of MS-13. And the marijuana trade puts a lot of money in the pocket of the cartels. And there's reason to believe that some of the surge of violence that we've seen in Baltimore has been cartels moving in to take over turf. So I would much rather that money go into the pockets of business people in our state, farmers in our state, than into cartels. Second, and this one you have to follow me on, but just follow me here. So I'm a trained criminologist. I was chose to become a criminologist because my granddad was a probation officer in Baltimore for 30 years. And he was my hero. And I teach criminal justice policy at Princeton University on Mondays. That's what I was doing yesterday. So this funny thing about the drug trade is the violence in the trade. And if you talk to police commanders, as my campaign has done across Baltimore City, you will hear them say that they aren't sure exactly all the elements of why the violence has surged so much in the last couple of years. But across the last decade, they're fairly certain that half the homicides were one set of weed dealers enforcing on another set of weed dealers. Now that surprises people who don't do things like study criminal deviance and violence or pay attention. But this is what you have to understand. The harder a drug is to source, the less violence there is in the trade because the territory is stable. Where you see violence in a drug trade is when territory is either challenged or shifted. So like there was a lot of violence around crack when it came on the scene because it was a new drug and there was new territory. But heroin in Baltimore, very stable territory, hard to source, not that much violence associated with it. Weed is literally the easiest drug to source. It's a weed. You can grow it in the basement, you can grow it in the roof, you can grow it in an empty lot, you can grow it in a forest, you can grow it pretty darn anywhere. So there's always a new set of weed entrepreneurs. And the trade as it stands now is regulated with bullets. And as somebody who's had 2 family members shot in Maryland in the last 10 years, including one who was testifying against drug dealers, I think it's time for us to try something different. Yes, sir.
Hi. I want to know your position on extending the pipeline into Cove Point here in the Baltimore area. What's your position on that?
All right, so I'm totally opposed to running the pipeline under the Potomac. Cove Point, we've just started to look into. What I'm clear on is that people deserve to have their safety study, the water and air safety study that they want done. That should have been done a long time ago.
Right.
And we need that transparency in our state. Now, I live in Pasadena, which I refer to as the Dundalk suburbs. and it really is. And, you know, kind of a crazy experience, but it underscores why we need more transparency for consumers about air and water safety. So I move in and I'm on well water, and I get my well water tested, and the company says, man, your water is cleaner than city water. I was like, wow. I said, did you test for radium? They said, no, that'd be a couple $100 extra bucks. I said, please tell me all the tests. I'll pay for all of them. My kids got to drink this stuff. And then they called me back and they said, wow, we're surprised your water doesn't glow. It has that much radium in it.
Wow.
And then I started talking to my neighbors. And in the kind of the general area where I live, some folks believe there's a heightened occurrence of cancer. I don't know. But the water folks are very clear that most of the wells that they've tested have radium in it above acceptable levels. You don't want, your government, if they know, has a responsibility to let you know. And if it's easy for them to know, they should know. And so whether it's Cove Point or whether it's chicken processing plants on the Eastern Shore, when I'm governor, we will be more aggressive about testing air and water, and we will be transparent.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you comment about mass transit in the Baltimore metro area?
I believe we should have a plan. I'm not clear that we've ever had a plan. I asked my grandma was a social worker in Baltimore for more than 30 years. She helped train Barbara Mikulski. She's 101 years old. She's sharp as a tack. Barbara told me once, she said, Bam said, you're Mamie Todd's grandson. I said, that's right. She said, your grandma made sure I didn't feel awkward as a social worker. I was like, wow, my grandma did a really good job because I've never seen you feel awkward anywhere. So I called my grandma the other day because we were in a conversation about the red line, and I was just like, way back, Grandma, when they were kind of laying down, was there a plan? She's like, no, it's always been kind of an afterthought and a bit of political expediency, and so we have to start with a plan for the county and the city. We've got to have a world-class public transportation system here. It's all got to fit together and integrate and work. Larry Hogan's decision to redline the red line may have cost us the opportunity to compete for Amazon. We have tremendous opportunity here to rebuild industry in forward-thinking ways. the Amazon distribution center, we should be building, really concentrating advanced manufacturing around that, because it's a way to distribute to the whole country. And we should be building a big, more robust, I know some folks are trying, but even a very robust free trade zone down near the port. And we should be trying to get utilize every advantage that port gives us right now, because we have the deepest channel on the East Coast, and the bigger tankers can come in full of goods, but other ones will come online. And so we really have to move quickly to seize every advantage to really establish ourselves as the dominant port on the East Coast. All of that means that we have to take transportation very seriously, both for moving people around. Right? When my mom commuted to Baltimore public schools, when my parents were teachers at Harlan Park Junior High, kids showed up on buses. This school year in the city, we had, I think, 3 kids hit on first day of school, and 1 was in critical condition. And again, it's all artifact of the fact that we don't have a vision. We need to have a vision, but we also need to understand that part of that extends to the port, extends to the airport, extends to, and we should have a vision for how all of that helps us build a more robust economy. And it's that lack of vision that Larry Hogan has. I said that took Baltimore out of the running for Amazon, and I believe many other companies as well.
On the same theme of transportation, as far as financing it, the president has put out something that's sort of there. But it's like, where's the money come from to build the roads, to build the system, to repair the roads, repair the infrastructure, the bridges that are falling down? Hanover Street Bridge is just crumbling, and a lot of them are in really bad shape.
Well, right now there's a good amount of money coming from us. We passed a gasoline tax in order to fund public transportation. Larry Hogan's hijacked it for these sort of 1970s fantasies for creating like Cadillac lanes and stuff. But we need to, frankly, again, it starts off with a priority problem. We have to reprioritize public transportation in the state budget and get away from the governor's current fixation on highways. We also then need to go further, obviously, with leveraging the strength of our delegation to get dollars out of Washington to help with the types of projects that are federally funded. But there's a lot we can do right now just by shifting priorities. This governor's been redoing highways in all sorts of parts of the state with money that was supposed to build public transportation in the more urban parts of the state.
Following up on that, there are a lot of places, metropolitan areas like Denver and even Dallas, kind of cowboy territory, where the business community felt like they needed to have transit in order to attract millennials to jobs and be economically competitive, and they all have supported like a 1% sales tax.
Yes.
Is that viable?
That's a conversation that we need to have. We need to put all those conversations on the table. Before taxes on the rest of us, I'd like to see us tax hedge fund managers who pay a lower effective tax rate than their executive assistants, which I think is a scandal. And we can, we should close corporate loopholes, and we should stop giving an advantage to people who sell on the internet over people who sell on Main Street. So there's a lot of tax fairness issues. I think that can create new revenue. I mean, part of what's going on in Denver, right? Why Denver is a boom town is because they've legalized cannabis, which will also be a big source. So. Yes, I'm all for any creative conversation about investing in our future. One thing we have to do with education, we talk about fully funding education, you talk about massively investing in education. When you invest in education, you have universal full-day pre-K. But you also can start teaching coding at the first grade like they do in the UK and in Singapore, because the kids will compete against their kids too. More than anything, we have to make sure that our public schools, our public community colleges, our public universities become the fattest pipeline into any industry in the state. It's easy here. I have a 19-year-old who just moved out of my basement 2 days ago, my nephew. It's easy to feel like there's a shortage of good jobs for our young people. There's not in Maryland. There's a shortage of young people who are trained for the jobs that we have. We import everything. People know that people move to this region to work in politics in DC. We import art teachers. We import welders. We import truckers. In Maryland, there's a demand every year. We have a demand for 3,000 construction managers. Our largest public university construction management program produces 2 dozen. One company is 300. You talk to them and you say, what do you do? They say, we import from everywhere. I said, how does that work for you? It usually works well for a couple of years, and then they fall in love with somebody here, and they take them back to where they grew up, and they start a business there that competes with ours. So, as governor, I'll be focused when it comes to education to make sure that every kid comes out ready for a career. I'll be hosting some leaders of some of the largest tech companies in the world in a couple of weeks in my capacity as an investor and somebody who's very engaged in figuring out how to make tech more inclusive. Anybody see the movie Hidden Figures? We're like a hidden state. Hidden Figures is about 30 black women that helped put men on the moon. Their stories hadn't been told. And my son, who's a budding feminist at 5, took me to see it. He said, Mommy took Morgan, that's his sister. So Mommy took Morgan, but they won't take me because I'm a boy. I said, Jack, I'm pretty sure they're not taking you because it's not a cartoon. He said, I don't care, Daddy. I want to go see it. And he was right. He was 4 years old at the time. He totally rapped through it. Well, Maryland actually has one of the highest concentration of blacks who are computer scientists, computer engineers, and computer programmers of any state in the country. And the biggest companies in the Silicon Valley are under 2 types of pressure. One, there's a 600,000 programmer shortage out there right now, headed towards 1 million in less than 5 years. That's why they're building expansion campuses in Pittsburgh and Raleigh. They haven't been building them here. So I sat down with some of the top executives at a couple of the companies, and I just said, look, those places can help you with that shortage, but they can't help you with the other pressure that you're under, which your inclusion numbers have gone radically backwards. 30 years ago, Hewlett-Packard, 30% female programmers, 10-12% black programmers, 15% black and brown programmers. Today, Google, 15% female programmers, under 3% black programmers. In Maryland, 20% of our programmers are black. But here's the thing. Here's the other thing that states aren't doing. So I'm talking to a guy at Google who supervises 15,000 programmers. And I said, what's recruiting like for you? He's like, man. He's like, we can't hire enough people with master's degrees. He said, this is what frustrates me, though. He said, about people like you. I said, you mean like me? He said, people who are running for office. I said, okay, you have my attention. He said, they don't ever ask me why. He said, I hire people who have master's degrees because I need people who have 2 years of relevant training in the coding that I need. He said, listen to me. I need people with 2 years of training in the coding that I need. He said, Ben, honestly, you could do that at high school. You could certainly do it at a community college. He said, but nobody's asking me that. And even in this state, he said, no one's really trying to help us do it. That's how we should be recruiting corporations to Maryland. We shouldn't be trying to give away the company store because we're desperate, because we lost, our governor lost 25% of our Fortune 500 companies in 1 week because he only had 4 to start with. Got to be engaged, looking at the future, bringing out all of our assets. Our number 1 asset is our people. Our number 2 asset is our public education system. Put it all on the table and say, how do we make this work for everybody? Not by, this current governor wants to give away $5 billion to the richest man in the world, so much money that we'll have a bunch of new school children and no way to expand the schools to accommodate. That's bad negotiating. Negotiating 101, don't let the richest man in the world play you off of 2 of your closest neighbors. DC, Maryland, Virginia should be giving them 1 bid, especially when they're looking at Montgomery County. I mean, come on. So when I'm governor, that's what you can expect, is you can expect that we will be forward thinking, because here's the other secret. I mentor students at Johns Hopkins Accelerator who have young incubators. I've invested in one of them, hoping to invest in a second one soon. Their startups have shortage of programmers too. Because again, here in Maryland, every industry has a shortage. And we could be training our own kids. They could be coming out of our community colleges and going straight into startups and into major tech employers here in much bigger numbers than they are now.
You've been a champion for civil rights. Many people feel that death with dignity is the next frontier when it comes to human rights. and the legislation will be introduced again if we have a Democratic governor. So can you tell us what your thoughts are?
Yeah, if that comes to my desk, I'll sign it. I'll sign it. You know, I've had friends died very painful deaths, who would have appreciated being able to, you know, make those decisions. If it comes to my desk, I will absolutely sign it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
As governor, what would you do to fight the federal proposals to drill offshore?
You know, so California, I think, has been creative in that regard. Actually banning basically any sort of movement of fuel coming, so you basically can't drill because you can't get the ships in, you can't get them out. We'll use every weapon at our disposal. I have no problem deploying thousands of wind turbines off of our coast, but I'll be damned if I let anybody drill off of our coast.
Yes, and thanks for coming tonight.
Sure.
Do you propose any legislation for strengthening guns and the voice of 7% of Marylanders that don't own a gun?
You know, what I'm most concerned about right now is making sure that if there's any type of restraining order against you, like, you know, we had a woman die just recently who had a temporary restraining order against her husband who was abusive and had guns in the home, and she was told, well, we can't take his guns because it's a temporary restraining order, not a permanent one. And then he killed both of them. And so when I'm governor, we will be very focused on the issue of guns and domestic violence, and making sure that we take away the risk. While I'm at it on that point, we're talking about sort of men with guns abusing women. Maryland's one of 35 states where if a police officer rapes you
That's correct.
in his custody,
That's right.
he can claim that you consented as a defense. As somebody who descends from slaves, who were raped for generations, no one could ever explain to me how somebody who's being held in shackles can consent. Not then, not now.
Right
I was
on.
proud when I was at Amnesty International to not just help pass the Prison Rape Elimination Act, but to actually get it renamed. It started off, get this, the Prison Rape Reduction Act. Like, that's a goal we should all be proud of. And the reason they called it reduction and not elimination, I quickly figured out, is that they were only focused on rapes committed by inmates, not committed by corrections officers, contractors, or anybody else. And of course, the latter tends to be women. And so we made it very clear to our allies who were pushing that while we appreciated their concern for men, unless they were willing to deal with everybody, we weren't going to support it. In fact, we would humiliate them in public, essentially. And they came around. And we created the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and you can count me to be concerned about issues like
Thanks. Thank you.
that.
Hey, it was great working with you for Bernie.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see you here.
It's good to see
I was
you.
going to ask you, this might actually not sound like a democratic value or whatever, but I wanted to ask what you think about overregulation in Maryland as far as, like, for business.
You know, one of the things I want to fix first is our business property tax form. Has anybody here filled that out?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
So my accountant, John Barry, is a wonderful guy across the street, will not like what I'm about to say. That tax in Maryland, minimum you have to pay is $350, but it's likely you'll pay your accountant twice that to fill it out for you. So it ends up costing you like $1,200, even if you just have like a little LLC like I do. It doesn't have a whole lot to report. And by the way, what I report this year is the same as what I reported last year, is the year before, very little changes. How might we do that differently? In Virginia, it's a web form. They store your information from last year, so you can just review it and click. It's $75. There's no way. Democrats, right? What makes us great? I grew up in one of those households. Grandma's household, you know, photo of Martin Luther King, photo of FDR. Yes, and John F. Kennedy, actually, in her case, was on Life magazine, like preserved in plastic. But yes. We are the party of working people. When we forget that working people suffer tremendously. There's no way to be the party of working people and not be the party of small business. There's just no way. And so, you know, when we elect Democrats who do not understand business, who are not curious, who are not concerned, we kill our reputation with small business people because they are working people too, and they expect us to fight for them as well. You know, I'm all for regulations that make us safer or make the world more just or more fair or more inclusive. But again, the fact that the Old Fox bookstore in Annapolis, I'll just name them, can't sell me a bagel because they're on the residential side of the street. No patience for silliness like that. And it's, you know, I raise it because it's funny, but there's a lot of regulations like that, a lot of duplicate regulations, and just silly things like our business tax, business property tax process.
Read your interview, Mother Jones Magazine. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Okay.
Now, one of the criticisms of your campaign, particularly from the black community recently, is that, you know, you've been endorsed by Bernie Sanders, but a lot of his supporters are not registered in the state as Democrats. So here comes the primary, and they can't vote for you.
Yeah.
So have you heard this, and how do you respond?
Sure. Well, you know, the couple things. I have not really heard that in my community or in the black community. I have encouraged a lot of independents to join our party, and it's easier to do here. And I think all of us should. You know, if you look at those folks, they tend to be young. What's the future of our party? You know, if it's not our young people. You know, you heard me say, you know, the Jesse Jackson campaign was the disruptive campaign in '88, and I went right with it into the Dukakis campaign, and maybe that's what prepared me to be the first Bernie surrogate to endorse Hillary, and the only one to not get booed when I did at the DNC. Our campaign is a big tent campaign, and we're the only one building a big tent campaign. And you saw it, if any of you joined us at the College of Notre Dame about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, when we rolled out our healthcare policy, we had 1,200 people in a room for 900. We would have had more, but the parking lot overflowed. My running mate spoke. It's Susie Turnbull. She's a former chair of the Maryland Party in 2010. We turned out 125,000 more voters than showed up in 2014. And we're committed to building a big tent campaign. And that's why I'm proud to not just be endorsed by Bernie Sanders, but also Cory Booker, Eric Garcetti, who would be the first Latino and first Jewish president of the United States. If he wins, we have 3 of the contenders. There'll be actually at least one more coming out soon. And what they see in our campaign is that we can win, and that this is the future of the Democratic Party. The future of the party is a campaign that unites people, that pulls folks together, that has respect for the guy who says, I voted for Trump after voting for Obama twice. Like, will you guys have me back? And says, hell yeah, come on in. And says to the independents, if you believe in what we're doing, please be part of us, because we're the party of working people. And typically those independents, frankly, they strayed from us when they felt like we strayed from working people.
I'm wondering how would you plan on, or how do you intend to respond to this Trump moment, the xenophobia and the racism, this resurgence? Like, what do you? Because I hear you saying you're gonna, you want to that the Democrats are working people, you want to appeal to them on those terms, but the Democrats have been losing them on those terms for the last 20 or so years.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering,
is
that enough? And how do you respond to the Trump phenomenon?
You go straight at him. Tell you a little story. Yes. So, 2016, I was doing what retired civil. I'm the nation's youngest retired civil rights leader. Right? So I was doing what retired civil rights leaders have done before me. I was going to all the black places. I was in South Carolina. I was in Detroit. I was in Chicago for Bernie Sanders. And we get on a plane and we're headed to Missouri. I should have paid attention to the fact that they said Missouri. Because when the plane touched down, there was not a 3-story building in sight. Now, yeah, me on the plane, I assume we're going to St. Louis or Kansas City. I'm coming from Detroit and Chicago. And I said, well, where are we? And they said, Ben, we're in the Ozarks. And I said, that's cool. I said, what time are you down at the local university? They said, oh, in a couple hours. I said, great, I'll see you when you get back to the plane. We're going to St. Louis next, right? They said, Ben, get off the plane, we need you. I said, really, here? They said, yeah, trust us. I said, all right. So we roll into Southwest Missouri State University, and it looks a little bit like Detroit, it looks a little bit like Chicago, because there's 7,000 people being turned away at the door, because there's 5,000 inside, and the fire marshal has arrived. We're scrambling to set up AV for them to hear. And I get inside, and I push my head through the curtain, and the greatest diversity in the room is that 20% of the men, like my neighbors in Pasadena, are in deer hunting camouflage. Lots of deer hunting camouflage in Pasadena. And I look at Bernie's campaign manager. I said, Jeff, who's bringing out Bernie for this crowd? He said, you are, Ben. I said, ha, 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 don't mess with me, I'm tired. He said, no, seriously, Ben, you are. I said, you think this is my crowd? He said, absolutely. You know, my grandma taught me the most important thing in leadership is to keep stepping beyond your comfort zone. She was a black social worker who had raised her kids in the McCullough Homes Housing Project, raised her daughter in the McCullough Homes Housing Project, who served the state from Cumberland to Salisbury. It was all over here in a time when it was dangerous for black folks to be on the road at night, in much of Maryland. And I knew exactly where my comfort zone ended that night. It was at that curtain. But I had a job to do, and I went out there and I did it. And I gave a speech about Donald Trump. I was tearing into Trump as being a threat to the future of humanity, February of 2016. And the crowd responded great. They loved their neighbors, but they're a little afraid of them. And they could see that their neighbors were turning towards Trump very, very fast. Bernie came out, and I did something that you typically don't do with Bernie Sanders. When you're traveling with him, I stayed to listen to the entire speech again. It's like the extended length version of Freebird. People just yell out lines, may not be at the right moment. And at so much certain point, the speech becomes a platform. And he's just, I'm sitting there, I want to hear how the crowd responds listening to the speech like music. How is the crowd going to respond when he says, Medicare for all, raise the minimum wage? And they respond just as strong as Detroit and Chicago. But I'm getting more anxious, not more affirmed. Because we're coming to the place about halfway through where Bernie calls for the police to stop killing unarmed black women and unarmed black men. And I knew how strong the crowds responded in Detroit and Chicago. And if this crowd was a little bit more tepid, I was going to be off in a way I didn't want to be off. Because I'm down, I'm fighting for everybody, including these folks. I need them to be fighting for my people too. And Bernie makes the call, and I close my eyes, and the response is just as strong. In fact, I pushed my head back out the curtain, and half the guys in deer hunting camouflage had jumped up on their chairs and put fists in the air. And we're $3 tile. No, I'm sorry. And we're hollering. And I put my head back through the curtain. Went back in the backstage, and I was like, "What did I just see?" And then it occurred to me, we're Democrats. We're really good at this thing called identity politics. And it's for a reason. We don't want to show up to any organization the way Mitt Romney showed up to the NAACP, pretending like racism didn't exist. And we couldn't hear anything after that, right? We're just like, la, la, la. Right? So we show up to the National Council of La Raza. We talk about immigration. We talk about small businesses. We talk about things that matter to Latino leaders. Talk about ending discrimination. If you show up to the National Organization for Women, you'll talk about the Equal Rights Amendment, even though our party really doesn't have a strategy for passing it, 40th year in a row or whatever. And we do that for every group in this grand alliance, this rainbow coalition called the Democratic Party, except for working class white men, because you can't talk to them about civil rights. And for about, you said 20 years, 25 years since the rise of the DLC, and we cozied up with Wall Street, we have been uncomfortable talking about what it takes to actually level the playing field. Here's what we fail to understand. Too often, and it cost us things like this last election. See, if you look at the people who voted for Obama and then voted for Trump, like Billy on the Eastern Shore, they tend to be white and working class. If you look at people who voted for Obama twice and then didn't vote, they tend to be black and working class. What do they have in common? They both felt like they were betrayed when it came to the economy. They felt like it was recession for the rest of us was a depression for them. I get back to West Baltimore, in other words, after being in the Ozarks, and I'm hanging out with my cousins on the more striving side of my family, because in the black community, since King was assassinated, upper middle class has quadrupled. Blacks around the poverty line below haven't gone down a point. That part of the community has more fun. So those are the cousins I tend to hang out with, right? So I'm hanging out with his cousins, and a couple of them are like, yeah, we didn't vote. They were waiting for the same conversation. Folks like me in my community, we're worried about getting discriminated against on the job. Other folks in my community are worried about getting a job. And the reality is that's a big part of the white community too. And so if we want those folks back, we gotta be real clear that we're gonna fight for them. And you know what? It feels good when you do. Because we're proud to be the party of FDR and JFK and MLK and RFK and LBJ, at least half the time. Vietnam, we still struggle with sometimes. And rightfully, too many of us died. But on civil rights. And what do they all have in common? They were down to expand opportunity. They were down to defend and expand civil rights. And they were down to end poverty. And if we aren't the party that decides that we're going to end poverty, more of our family, more of our young people are in jeopardy than we realize. We're the first generation of Americans where the parents and the grandparents agree that the children are likely to be worse off. That's how you fight darkness.